Let's now return to the previous question, which is still unanswered. What caused the initial collapse of the upper section of the towers onto the rest of the building? As we have seen, there was a bowing of the facade before the collapse, but the trusses didn't have any strength of their own to cause such a massive bending of the external structure. If explosives were used, however, and this part of the core structure was made to collapse first, then the trusses would have had enough strength to pull along the facade and to initiate the global collapse. In fact, it was observed that the antenna from the north tower begins dropping slightly before the top section of the building collapses, which indicates the central structure was destroyed first. Even though a controlled demolition seems the only valid explanation for the collapses, the debunkers have brought different arguments against this possibility. The first argument is that it would have been impossible to place the explosives under everyone's eyes.
You would take an army of workers. It would take months. So this idea that, some crew dressed in black could sneak in the middle of the night and wire a building like that to be demolished is just, it's absurd.
Ipotizziamo che siano veramente state minate. Come si fa? Entrano di nascosto delle persone, portano dell'esplosivo. Scusi, sa, devo lasciare qui questa serie di zainetti. Non ci faccia caso, poi spariscono.
There are, however, different facts to be considered. The first one is that in the months previous to 9/11, a major renovation of the elevator system in both towers was undertaken. From the March 2001 issue of Elevator World, we read, Ace Elevator undertook what was perhaps one of the largest, most sophisticated elevator modernization programs in the industry's history at New York City's prestigious World Trade Center. No one is suggesting that this company had anything to do with the possible planting of explosives. But such an extensive renovation process would have certainly provided the cover for a special team to access the internal structure of the buildings at any given time. As explained by Richard Heumann, Chief Electrical Engineer for the Twin Towers, the elevator shafts gave direct access to the core columns.
I'm very familiar with the interior structure that surrounded the elevator shafts. And, of course, their access to the elevator shafts gave them total access to the surrounding core columns, the interior of the core columns.
Secondly, the movement of heavy equipment on floors that were supposedly empty was noticed in the weeks leading up to 9/11. Scott Forbes worked for a financial institution on the 97th floor of the South Tower.
It must have been at least 4 to 6 weeks before 9/11. It was like rebuilding work going on upstairs. The tenants, the people from Aon who had been there were moved somewhere else. The offices were just vacant. And there was a lot of heavy machinery building work going on. It was almost like pneumatic drills and lots of hammering, so much so that the floors were shaking. That's how noticeable it was. It was almost as if something heavy was being moved and then it was being taken off wheels, and it was like, boom! Our floor underneath literally shook. You could feel the weight above you.
William Rodriguez, an employee at the Twin Towers for more than 20 years, recalls a similar experience.
As I stood there on the 33rd floor, I heard very strange noises on the 34th floor. I heard very heavy equipment being moved around, and it sounded like dumpsters with metal wheels being moved around, and I got scared because I knew it was an empty floor. Nobody was supposed to be there. As a matter of fact, not even the elevators stopped there. You have to have a special access key to open the door on the 34th floor.
Thirdly, after the 1993 attack, bomb-sniffing dogs had been adopted in the security system of the Twin Towers. But on Thursday, September the 6th, bomb-sniffing dogs were abruptly removed, according to a security guard, with no apparent reason. And lastly, there was an unprecedented power down in the South Tower on the very weekend before 9/11. For the first time in 30 years, all the security systems in the building had become useless at the same time. People could come and go as they pleased, even in protected areas, without being seen nor recorded by surveillance cameras.
The previous weekend, there had been a power down. Because of the power down, there was a complete breakdown of security that weekend. We had guided tours coming into secured areas by mistake and nobody picking it up because there's no intrusion alarms or anything else.
Scott Forbes was also present during the power down.
There was a power down in the South Tower on the weekend of the 8th and 9th of September. And it wouldn't have just have affected camera security, it would have affected all the secure systems on doors for either key locks or security badges and so on. To undo them, they weren't working because they're all powered by electricity, so there was no power, there was no backup system, therefore they were all open.
What again was the excuse that the Port Authority gave you, Scott, for this 36-hour period of the power being down in the South Tower?
The explanation was that there was a recabling exercise to increase the bandwidth of networks that were available in the towers. But what I can recall is that there were plenty of toolboxes, there were plenty of spools of cable, there were men around wearing overalls. They appeared to be like engineers. At the time, it seemed perfectly legitimate what they were doing because this was the story we were given, that there was a recabling exercise.
The debunkers are right. It would have been very difficult to bring in the explosives without being noticed. But with the proper cover story, it could have been done under everyone's eyes, in full daylight, without anybody even questioning what was going on. Another argument by the debunkers is that controlled demolitions, they say, always begin from the bottom, while the destruction of the Twin Towers clearly started from the top.
Controlled demolitions always begin from the bottom of a building. You cut the bottom columns and then the building falls. If you look at the World Trade Centers, both of them began at the impact wounds where the planes hit.
Il crollo della torre parte dall'alto, mentre nelle esplosioni controllate parte sempre dal basso. Si demoliscono le fondamenta, poi si va su e la torre, il palazzo che deve essere demolito, crolla subito.
But this is not true. Every controlled demolition can be designed according to the needs. In fact, sometimes it's not a good idea to start from the bottom.